Hey there, this is Sid and today we shall solve a SQL problem from StrataScratch. The title of the problem is New and Existing Users. It's listed as a hard problem and the ID of the problem is 2028. As always, before we start going through the problem statement, we shall first have a look at the input table. I have exported the input table to Microsoft Excel so it's easier to understand. So this is the input table. The name of the table is fact_events. This table lists activities of users who are logged in to a client and can perform various kinds of events. The second column of the table is the time ID. This is the date on which the event happened. The third column is the user ID column. It is the unique identifier of the user. The fourth column is the customer ID column. It is the name of the company through which the user performed the event. The fifth column is the client ID column. It lists whether the user used a desktop or a mobile to perform the event. The next column is the event type column. It captures the nature of the event. For example, whether the user sent a message or received a file or received a video call and so on. And the last column of the table is the event ID column. It is an integer which codes the event type. For example, message sent has a code of 3. So all message sent events will have a code of 3. Video call received has a code of 7. File received has a code of 2 and so on and so forth. So I hope you now understand the input table. Let's now go back to the problem statement. So the problem statement says that calculate the share of new and existing users for each month in the table. And here is the definition of a new and existing user. A new user is a user who started using services in the current month, which means that user has no usage history in the previous months. An existing user is an user who had used services in the current month, but they also used services in any of the previous months. And here is an information about the input table that makes the problem a little bit simpler. It says that all dates are from the year 2020. So that means if you have the month of February, you won't have to worry whether that month came from 2020 or 2019 or 2021. Had the year been relevant as well, the month February alone would not have been sufficient to completely identify the month. You would also need the year. So this information makes the problem somewhat simpler. So I have sort of explained the problem statement at a very high level, but let me go back to the Microsoft Excel file and try to explain the problem in a little bit more depth. So what this problem is asking us to do is each user will appear multiple times in this table. For example, this user 3668QPYBK appears here in the first row, the row labeled by the ID 1. And then if you scroll down this table, you will find that the same user makes another appearance further down the table in the row labeled by the ID 19. So the first event happened in the month of February. The second event also happened in the month of February. And it is possible that the user will have other events in the month of March, April, and so on. So in each month, there will be activities of many users. Some of those users would have appeared in this table for the first time in that month. Other users would have appeared in that month as a repeat user. That is, some of the users would also have appeared in previous months as well. So those users are repeat users or existing users. Whereas if an user makes her or his first appearance on a given month, then for that month, that user is considered to be a new user. So the distinction between a new user and existing user is this. If a user has made her or his first appearance on a given month, then that user will be considered as a new user for that month. But if she or he makes subsequent appearances in the following months, then for those following months, she or he would be considered as an existing user. I hope this distinction of users into new and existing is now clear to you. What the problem wants us to do is, for each month, find out how many users appeared on that month for the first time, find out how many users appeared in that month for the second, third, or fourth time. The first category of users are new users, the second category of users are existing users, and the final form in which the problem expects us to provide the solution is not in terms of the absolute numbers of the new and existing users per month, but rather as a fraction of the total number of users per month. So for example, if for the month of March there are 4 new users and 6 existing users, then the total number of users is 10. So the fraction of new users would be 4 divided by 10, that is 0.4. And the number of existing users would be 6 divided by 10, that is 0.6. So I hope you understand the problem statement more clearly now. As always, let's now first try to solve this problem using Microsoft Excel. So in this intermediate table 1, what I have done is I have copied the time ID and the user ID columns as is from the first table, except that instead of using the entire time ID, I have extracted the month from that column. Now you might see that the rows are not in exact correspondence. That is because I have sorted this table. But trust me, these two columns and these two columns are exactly the same, except that the month column extracts the month field from the time ID column. So I hope the intermediate 1 table is clear to us. Now, this intermediate 2 table is generated by using a pivot on the intermediate 1 table. Notice that in the intermediate 1 table, a given user will be repeated many times because a user may make multiple appearances in a given month and in subsequent months. So for example, if you look at this user has made a total of 5 appearances, first in the month of February and then 4 times in the month of March. Similarly, this user has also made 5 appearances, 3 times in the month of February and twice in March. What this pivot table is doing is, it is taking the distinct users from the user ID column of the intermediate table 1 and finding out the earliest month, the minimum of the month value. This table essentially tells us that this user was a new user in the month of February because that is when the user first appeared. This user also was a new user in the month of February. This user, on the other hand, was a new user in the month of March. That means this user never appeared in the month of February. Although all of these users may have made an appearance in a subsequent month. So I hope you understand this table now. So the next intermediate table is almost exactly the same as the previous intermediate table 2. The only difference is I have added a new column, which I shall explain in a moment. Apart from that, I have converted this pivot table into a normal table here that will make this table easier to manipulate. That's all. And I'll return to this column user underscore mean underscore month later. I hope you understood this part. Now the next one is again a pivot table, and what this table does is from this intermediate table 2, it finds out for each month what is the count of users. So for the month of 2, the count of users is 13. That means in the month of February, there were 13 users who were new users. Similarly, in the month of March, the number of users in this table is 5, which means for the month of March, there are 5 new users. And similarly, in the month of April, there are 2 new users. So I hope you understand the new user table as well. This is an important milestone in the solution of the problem. If you recall, to arrive at the final solution, we need the count of new users for each of the months and the count of existing users for each of the months. So this table solves that first question, the count of new users for each of the months. What is left to be done now is to find the count of existing users for each of the months. Now, here the intermediate table 4 is again a copy of this intermediate table 1. So all of the users and the months have been copied over. So this table will have the same number of rows as the original table that we started with. And what we have done in this table is we have found out whether that user was a new user for that month or not. So how can we do that? That is where this artificial column that I introduced in this intermediate table comes handy. This column Q was nothing but a concatenation of the month followed by an underscore sign followed by the user's ID. So if in this intermediate table 4, the month followed by an underscore followed by the user ID is present in this column Q of the intermediate table 3, that would mean that that user was a new user because the intermediate table 3 had only new users, if you recall. On the other hand, if a month followed by an underscore followed by the user ID, that combination did not appear in the column Q of the intermediate table 3, that would mean that that user on that month was not a new user. It must be an existing user. And if you just eyeball this table, it is easy to see why this highlighted user is an existing user in the month of April. Because if you look above in this row, the month of February, that user was already present. So in the month of February, this user was a new user, and hence in the month of April, she or he is an existing user. So that is how this intermediate table 4 has been generated. This is again an useful intermediate step. The only two problems with this table is it contains both new as well as existing users, whereas we have already solved the new user problem. We need to solve only the existing user problem. The second problem with this table is a given month, user ID and existing flag combination can appear more than once in this table. For example, if we look at this user 0280XJGEX, she or he appeared in the month of March as an existing user in this row number 108. And now if you scroll down to this row number 135, you again find the same user 0280XJGEX appearing in the same month, March, again as an existing user. So if we let both of these entries remain in this table, then we would be counting this user as an existing user for the month of March twice. But we don't want to do that. We want to count this user for the month of March as an existing user only once. So these two problems, the problem with this table having both new as well as existing users, and the problem of a user appearing in the same month multiple times as an existing user, are solved in the intermediate tables 5 and 6 respectively. In the intermediate table 5, we have kept only the existing users from the intermediate table 4, that solves the first problem, and in the intermediate table 6, we have taken a distinct of the entries from the intermediate table 5, where by distinct we mean it should be distinct across all three columns. So a given user should not appear on the same month more than once. So as you can see, this user appears twice in the month of March. So that has been fixed here by taking a distinct. So now in this intermediate table 6, we have for each month the list of existing users where the existing users are counted only once. So going from here to the count of existing users for each month is a fairly straightforward step. And that has been done using a pivot table. So as you can see, for the month of March, there are 12 existing users, and for the month of April, there are again 12 existing users. A somewhat interesting, although somewhat obvious as well, thing to note from this table is that the month of February doesn't appear here. And the reason is fairly evident. This entire database, the table fact_events, started in the month of February. So all the users in the month of February had to be new users because there was no month of January. So they could not have appeared in an earlier month. So all the users are new users for the month of February. So now I hope you understand this existing user table as well. Now we have the final table here. So I have three distinct months, 2, 3 and 4, February, March and April. And from the new user table, which is this, I have copied these three numbers over, 13, 5 and 2. And then from the existing users table, I have copied the two numbers 12 and 12 for 3 and 4 and put in a 0 for the month of 2, February. And the total column is just the sum of the new and the existing users. And this fraction of new users is new divided by total. So for the month of February, it is 1 because as we noticed, all the users are new users for February. For the month of March, that would be 5 by 17, that's 0.294. And for April, that's 2 by 14, that would be 0.143. And similarly, the fraction of existing users is this column divided by the total. So 0 by 13, 12 by 17 and 12 by 14 respectively, which leads to these three fractions. If you quickly compare this against the existing output, you would see that it matches with the existing output. So now that we understand the problem statement and how to solve it using Microsoft Excel, let us try to solve it with SQL. As always, I have written the SQL query in Notepad++ because that's where it's easiest to see. Now this solution is probably not the cleverest way to solve this problem, but it is fairly simple to follow. I have made use of a series of cities which by themselves are fairly straightforward to understand. We shall go through these one at a time. The first city here, it uses the input table, the fact_events table, and fetches the user ID and the minimum month. Since the month is not readily available, we have extracted the month from the time ID using the month function. and then taken a minimum of that. And of course, we have to group by the user ID to find the earliest month that that user ID made an appearance in the fact underscore events table. So if we run this in the SQL editor, the output that we would get is this. For each user ID, it gives us the minimum month or the earliest month on which that user ID made an appearance in the fact underscore events table. The next one is our first milestone. It gives us the count of users for each month who are new users. So if you look at this query, it is making use of the first one. The first one gave us each user ID followed by the earliest month. So if you use that table and find out, say for the month of 2, how many users are there in this output, that would give you the count of new users for the month of 2. And that is exactly what this city is doing. So if we take these two together and run them in the SQL editor window, the output that you would see would give you the count of new users for each month. So for the month of 2, you have 30 new users. For the month of 3, you have 5 new users. And for the month of 4, you have 2 new users. If you go back to our Excel file for a moment, you'd see that this agrees with what we have derived in Excel. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to find out the count of existing users for each of the months. The way we go about doing that is we first find out a way to tag or label each record of the original table, the fact underscore events table, as either a new user or as an existing user. And how do we do that? So you see we have the facts table as the left table of a left join, and on the right we are using the user min month. So if you recall, the user min month gives us each user in one column and the minimum month in the second column. So if you join the original fact underscore events table with the user min month table using the user ID and the month as the joining key, what you would get is for each row of the fact underscore events table, you would get the earliest month of that user. So if we take the CTE up to the month underscore existing underscore user count with duplicates from the SQL query, if I comment out this where clause, add the min month from the user min month CTE, and then select everything from this newly defined CTE, what we see is this row here where the user ID has a user month of 2 and also a min month of 2, that row corresponds to a new user situation because the min month is the same as the user month in that table. Only when you have a min month as null would mean that that user for that month is not a new user, because had it been a new user, then the min month would have been the same as the month that appears in this column, right? So if I now uncomment this where clause, what that would basically do is it would remove all the rows where you have something in the min month column. It will only keep those where you have a null or a blank in the min month column, and those are our existing users. So if I now run this query with the where condition uncommented, you see this last row is null for all the rows. So this is a step forward toward the direction of getting the existing user counts on a monthly basis. However, there is still one more challenge that we also faced in the Excel solution to the problem. For example, this user ID and user month combination is appearing multiple times. So we have to deduplicate this table. So now if we go back to our notepad++ query again, you would see that is why I had named this city as underscore dupes. The next city simply takes a distinct of all the records from the previous city. So now if I run up to this point, you would see that the deduplication has been done and each user ID month combination appears only once. So this entire table lists all the users and the month combinations for the cases where that combination does not represent a new user. That is, all of these represent an existing user, but there are no duplicates. When I say there are no duplicates, the user ID month combination will not be duplicated. But of course, a given user ID may still appear in different months as an existing user. That makes perfect sense. So I hope up to this point it is clear to us. The next step is very easy. All we have to do is, for each month, find out how many users are there in the user ID column. That would give us the count of existing users for each month. And that is what this CTE does. So now, if I copy this and run this in the SQL editor window, what you would see is, you would see the month and the user count. So these are the counts of existing users for each of the months. So I hope this part is also clear to you now. Now the next part. I have a commented CTE here. I will uncomment this CTE and tell you what the small problem with that CTE is, so that you understand the actual CTE when I run that one. So here what I have done is, I have taken the new user count per month and the existing user count per month and performed a full outer join. Because if for a given month there are only new users but no existing users, I would like to keep that in my final output. Also, if for a month there are only existing users but no new users, I would like to keep that as well in my final output. Hence this full outer join. But the small problem with this is, as you will see, for example here, there is a month 2 for the new user case, which does not appear for the existing user case, which you recall from the initial discussion, because the table starts at the month 2, so there cannot be any existing user in month 2. So this first column min underscore month and the second column new user, so they together give us the month and the new user count, whereas the third and the fourth columns give us the month and the existing user count. So what I would like to have is the month 2, the new user count as 13 and the existing user count as 0. The month 3 with the new user count as 5 and the existing user count as 12. And the month 4 with a new user count of 2 and an existing user count of 12. So basically I don't want 2 month columns, I want only 1 month column, but they should be combined. So if there is a blank in one of the month columns, that should be taken over by the non-blank month from the other column. How we have handled this is by the actual CTE that I have used. So now that you have seen the small problem that we had with this approach, I have used the corrected CTE here. So what it does is, instead of keeping the month from the new user table and the month from the existing user table as separate columns, it uses the qualys function and gives the 2 months as input to the qualys function. What that would do is, coming back to the previous output, for these 2 month columns, it will check both the entries and it will keep the first non-null entry. So for the first row, it will have 3 and 3 in both places. So the first non-null entry will be 3 and it will keep a 3. For the second row, it will see a 4 and a 4, and the first non-null entry will be a 4, so it will keep 4. In the last one, it will see a 2 and a null. So the first non-null entry would be a 2 and it would keep a 2. So we have thus bypassed the problem of having 2 month columns. And next, one small thing is, again, the existing user count for the month of 2 is 0. So that is taken care of through the isNull function. So if a user count, existing or new, is null, then that should be replaced by 0. And we have done that for both the new user and the existing users. So I hope you understand up to this part. We have also included one more column, and that is just the sum of the new user and the existing user, and call that the total user count. So now let us run this CTE and see what the output looks like. Try to remember or rewind back in time if you need to see this output again. So this is the output of the last CTE that we have on the screen. Month 2, new user count is 13 existing is 0, total is 13. Month 3, new user 5, existing user 12, total 17. And month 4, new 2, existing 12 and total 14. If you quickly go back to the Excel file here, you will see that that agrees with what we have derived. So this is the last city that we really need. Beyond this point, all we have to do is, going back to the output of the SQL again, all we have to do is divide this 5 by 17 to get the new user fraction, divide this 12 by this 17 to get the existing user fraction for the month 3, and so for the other months. So now if we copy this entire SQL query, paste it in the SQL editor and run it, we should get the final output. But before we execute, a small thing. I have multiplied the numerator by 1.0 so that this entire thing comes out as a float or a decimal. Without the 1.0, in some SQL engines, it will get converted to an integer. And finally, I have applied the round function and kept 3 decimal places because that's what the expected output is like. So if we run this query now, we see that this is our final output. Month 2, share of new users is 1, share of existing users is 0, 3.294.706 and 4.143 and 0.087, which agrees with the output that was provided by StrataScratch. So we have been able to solve this problem. I do agree that this solution is a bit tedious and lengthy, not particularly clever, but it has the advantage of being relatively straightforward and clean because we have used CTEs to systematically solve the problem. I shall keep coming back with solutions to more SQL problems from StrataScratch, so please stay tuned.